On to our top stories. Address debt or inflation, Kenya faces a tightening policy trap. Government for the people, Kenya faces growing trust test. When the sun comes down, Kenya faces droughts, floods, and rising resource strain. First aid or external aid, Kenya faces a dependency dilemma. Thank you viewers from Kenya and around the world for making time to join us. My name is Jesse Gitonga and I will be with you for the next 30 minutes as we unpack these stories. Do stay with us till the end. This is the Tosh program. You can join in the conversation on social media at Jesse Tosh or at Tosh program across all social media platforms, #UnpackToday, or reach out to us via SMS or WhatsApp on 0796 269798. Public debt has climbed to nearly 12 trillion Kenya shillings, over 63% of GDP, while almost two-thirds of government revenue now goes to debt servicing. At the same time, inflation, though within the central bank's target at around 4.5%, remains a persistent threat. As global financial conditions tighten, policymakers face a dilemma: rise rates to tame prices and risk worsening debt, or ease policy to support growth and risk inflation returning.
Kenya's economic policymakers are navigating a narrow and increasingly risky policy corridor shaped by high public debt, limited fiscal space, and fragile growth prospects. Public debt now stands at 11.8 trillion, or roughly 63.7% of GDP, putting the country at high risk of debt distress. Nearly 67% of government revenue is consumed by debt servicing, far exceeding international benchmarks and leaving limited funds for essential services like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Much of Kenya's borrowing is domestic, which increases refinancing risks and absorbs credit that could otherwise support the private sector. Experts warn this crowding out effect slows investment and job creation, particularly for small businesses. On the inflation front, prices have moderated slightly, remaining within the central bank's 2.5 to 7.5% target and around 4.5 to 4.6%. This has allowed cautious rate cuts to stimulate lending, though economists caution that any policy easing carries the risk of renewed inflation or currency pressure. Kenya's GDP growth slowed to 4.7% in 2024, with projections suggesting a rebound to near 5% in 2025 to 2026, provided revenue collection improves and external shocks are contained. Policymakers now face a delicate balance between tightening to protect price stability risks slowing growth, while easing to boost the economy could undermine debt sustainability. With limited room for error, Kenya's economic decisions over the next year could shape its trajectory for years to come.
With us in studio to unpack this issue is our correspondent,
James Karogo,
and our economic analyst,
Dr. Philemon Mandela,
who joins us via Google Meet. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. I'll start with you.
James Karogo.
Kenya's public debt is over 63% of GDP, with nearly two-thirds of revenue going to debt servicing. How close is the country to a debt crisis?
Kenya is uncomfortably close to a debt crisis, not majorly in full crisis mode yet, but definitely in the danger zone. When public debt is over 63% of GDP and about 67% of government revenues going just to servicing that debt, it leaves close to no chance to fund essentials like healthcare, education, or even infrastructure. That's a major red flag. It also means the government has limited flexibility if there's an economic shock. On top of that, heavy domestic borrowing is squeezing private businesses, slowing investment and job creation. So, while Kenya isn't in default, the high debt burden and tight fiscal space means the risk of distress is true, especially if growth slows or borrowing costs rise further.
What specific warning signs would indicate that Kenya has moved from being a high risk at debt distress to an actual debt crisis?
First, if the government struggles to meet debt repayment on time or has to roll over debt at much higher interest rates, that's a major red flag. Second, a sharp fall in the shilling would raise the cost of servicing external debt, making repayment even harder. Third, If the debt keeps rising faster than GDP, especially where revenue remains weak, sustainability becomes questionable. Another key signal would be debt servicing consuming even more than the current 67% of revenue, leaving almost nothing for public services. In short, a crisis begins when the government can no longer comfortably finance or refinance its obligations without severe economic strain.
Interesting. This goes to you,
Dr. Philemon Mandela.
Policymakers seem caught between tightening to control inflation and easing to support growth. Which risk is more dangerous right now, rising debt or rising prices, and why?
Right now, rising debt looks like the bigger danger. Inflation is around 4.5%, which is comfortably within the central bank's target range. That suggests price pressures are present but not out of control. Debt, however, is already at 63% of GDP, and nearly 2/3 of government revenue is going to servicing it. That's a much more immediate structural strain. If debt keeps rising, it limits government spending, crowds out private investment, and increases the risk of distress. If growth slows or global rates rise, inflation can be managed with policy tools. But once debt becomes unsustainable, the consequences like austerity, default risk, or currency pressure are much harder to reverse.
Well, if rising debt is the bigger immediate risk, what specific policy steps should the government prioritize to stabilize debt without completely choking economic growth?
If stabilizing debt is a priority, the government needs to focus on smart fiscal consolidation, not harsh austerity that crashes growth. First, improving revenue collection is key. That means broadening the tax base and sealing leakages rather than just raising taxes. If revenue grows sustainably, debt pressure eases without squeezing households and businesses further. Second, spending has to become more efficient, cutting waste, delaying non-essential projects, and prioritizing high-impact sectors like infrastructure and productive investment can support growth while controlling deficits. Third, gradually reducing reliance on expensive domestic borrowing would help ease the crowding out effect on private businesses. The goal isn't to slam the brakes on the economy, is to steady the debt path while protecting growth drivers.
That is our correspondent and economic analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, for making time. Kenya's pledge to serve its citizens is under intense pressure as gaps in accountability, transparency, and service delivery become increasingly visible. According to the latest Corruption Perception Index, Kenya scored just 32 out of 100 and ranked 121st out of 180 countries, signaling serious governance challenges. National surveys show trust in key state institutions, including the presidency, parliament, and electoral commission, has declined sharply over the past decade, with fewer than half of citizens saying they trust these institutions somewhat or a lot. At the same time, a majority of Kenyans struggle to access transparent information on government, planning, and local development projects.
Kenya's promise of accountable governance is being tested on multiple fronts, from public confidence in institutions to transparency in public affairs and elections. Citizens' trust in government and public institutions has steadily declined. Recent surveys show that only about 45% of Kenyans trust the presidency, down dramatically from 72% in 2014. Trust in parliaments and the courts has also fallen, while confidence in the police and electoral commission remains low. Transparency International's 2024 Corruption Perception Index placed Kenya 121st out of 180 countries with a score of 32 out of 100, below both the sub-Saharan and global averages, evidence, analysts say, of pervasive governance challenges and corruption risks. Weak transparency persists at local levels too. A recent governance report found that just 29.8% of citizens were aware of their county development plans, and an overwhelming 93.5% could not state the cost of public projects in their areas. Bribery and corruption also remain major barriers to public service delivery across counties. A nationwide survey found that 1 in 4 Kenyans has experienced bribery when accessing basic services such as health, police, or land administration. On the election front, observers have noticed irregularities in by-elections, including voter bribery and intimidation, breaches of ballot secrecy, and coordinated misinformation, raising fresh concerns about the credibility of voting processes. All these factors contribute to growing skepticism about whether government truly works for the people, with many citizens feeling excluded from the decision-making and disillusioned by unfulfilled promises and opaque governance structure. In a country that prides itself on democratic ideals, these governance gaps are fueling a trust deficit that could shape Kenya's politics and public life for years to come.
Here is what's coming up after the break.
When the sun comes down,
Kenya faces droughts, floods, and rising resource strain.
All right, listen up. Colocate is on a mission. It makes our gums happy and our teeth strong. See? We're moving forward and making changes.
It's kind of a big thing.
Colgate Herbal uses traditional nature's herbs and combines it with Colgate Science for healthy gums and strong teeth.
And we'll leave no smile behind.
Some kids are just a step ahead. The winning difference? A spoonful of Blue Band. The only one with the right levels of omega-3 and 6. Blue Band, a spoonful of difference.
New Garnier Even and Bright Vitamin C Plus Booster Serum, combining vitamin C with niacinamide and salicylic acid to create vitamin C Plus. 100 times stronger than classical vitamin C. Minus 66% dark marks, even brighter skin from day 6. New Even and Bright Vitamin C Plus Booster Serum by Garnier.
Ngozi yako ina glow. Nilijipaka mafuta leo asubuhi nikikam, lakini skin yangu ishaparara and it looks so dull.
Sis, see, it's the new Nice and Lovely Lemon Extract Body Lotion. Hiyo ndo secret yangu to a moisturized and bright skin. Usimix.
New Nice and Lovely Lemon Lotion, enriched with vitamin C and sunflower seed oil for 48-hour nourishing glow and brighter skin. Try Nice and Lovely Lemon Lotion today.
For the big, for the small, the short, and the tall. Peacemakers, risk takers. For the optimists, pessimists, exhibitionists. For long distance love. For the far-sighted, nearsighted. For introverts and extroverts. For the thinkers and the doers. For old friends. Coca-Cola. For everyone.
Once again, we are at it together. We are absolutely everywhere and we love it. Nothing is for sure in this game. Rivalries are re-stoked. Momentum is gathering. This is what makes us tick. This is what makes our heart beat. Week on week and month on month. This is the stuff of cloud. Friendship becomes second to the colour of a shirt. There is no certainty. There is always jeopardy. It is always on the edge. It is always football time. This is the league we want to watch. And that's kind of it.
The new football season starts on the 4th of August. Only on SuperSport on DSTV.
To some, it's no more than wheels and cogs, cleverly marking time. While others may see what we see, the steel that we strengthen ourselves, each carat of gold that we forge, every single part designed, shaped, polished by our own hands. It takes constant care and countless skills, but above all, it takes time. Only after hundreds of days of devoted work can we finally print this word on each single dial: superlative. The mark of our autonomy, our responsibility, our integrity. For this is all we make. But we make it all, so that in time, you can make it your own.
Though nothing will keep us together. Oh, we can be heroes. for one day.
If there's one thing I've learned in 23 seasons, don't be afraid of rejection. It's the greatest teacher of all time.
We are the ambition. The chase. The risk. The boldness. We are on the edge. Fighting back. We're in control. We are free. We are traders. Exodus, born to trade.
The soul of BMW. Where will you find it? Here? Here? Or here? Here. What about here? Or maybe here? And what about here?
Yes.
But above all, here. Driven by soulmates. 100% driving pleasure. 100% electric.
Thank you for staying with us. Kenya is increasingly at the mercy of climate extremes, from prolonged droughts leaving millions vulnerable to malnutrition and water scarcity, to heavy rains and floods destroying crops, displacing families, and straining already stretched resources. More than 2 million Kenyans are now facing heightened food insecurity and health risks due to one of the driest rainy seasons on record, with short rains delivering only 30 to 60% of normal rainfall in many areas. At the same time, flooding in the recent years has affected as many as 43 counties and displaced tens of thousands of households, destroying cropland and livestock. From farmers to pastoralists, competition for water, land, and food is intensifying, raising tensions and testing Kenya's capacity to manage scarce resources.
Across Kenya, changing weather patterns are disrupting lives, livelihoods, and food systems. In late 2025, one of the driest rainy seasons on record hit large swathes of the country. Rainfall between October and December delivered just 30 to 60% of the long-term average, leaving soil parched and water sources depleted. The World Health Organization warns that this severe drought has placed over 2 million people at risk of health and nutrition crises, with malnutrition rising and families forced to rely on unsafe water, increasing the risk of disease. Climate scientists point to longer trends of warming temperatures and erratic rains that reduce soil moisture, stress crops, and heighten heat stress on livestock, undermining food production and deepening insecurity for farmers and pastoralists alike. At the same time, Kenya is no stranger to flooding. Heavy rains over successful seasons have caused rivers to burst their banks, affecting tens of thousands of households across more than 40 counties, destroying tens of thousands of acres of cropland and killing livestock. These back-to-back extremes, droughts followed by floods, compound food insecurity and resource scarcity. In flood-affected areas, cropland is waterlogged or eroded, delaying planting and damaging infrastructure. Water scarcity and drought also are intensifying competition for what little resources remain. In pastoral and arid regions, herders trek further for pasture, leading to rising tensions between communities over shrinking water resources and grazing land. Vulnerable families face tough choices between selling livestock at distressed prices and coping with rising food costs. These climate shocks are more than a weather story. They are a test of Kenya's resilience, its institutions' ability to manage scarce resources, and communities' capacity to adapt to an increasingly volatile environment. As droughts deepen and floods surge, equitable access to water, food, and land, and fair management of these resources have never been more urgent.
Kenya continues to depend heavily on foreign aid to fund development and cope with crises, but that reliance is exposing the country to growing risk as global cooperation shifts and multilateral funding becomes less predictable. Latest parliamentary figures show that external funding now makes up about 43% of Kenya's development budget, with multilateral patterns providing nearly 70% of that support. That same budget has shrunk as domestic contributions fall, raising questions about sustainability and national autonomy. In sectors like health, donor support accounts for roughly 25% of total spending, with just 4 donors supplying nearly 90% of external health aid, a concentration that leaves critical services vulnerable to shifts in global priorities.
Kenya's development and crisis response architecture remains heavily shaped by external partners, a reality that both supports and constrains national autonomy. Recent budget analysis shows that about 43% of Kenya's development budget is financed by external partners, with multilateral institutions including the World Bank, United Nations agencies, and others supplying nearly 70% of that aid component. The reliance is particularly visible in the health sector, where donor contributions account for roughly 1/4 of total health spending. 4 major donors, the United States, the Global Fund, the United Kingdom, and Gavi, provide nearly 90% of external health aid, underlining how concentrated and dependent these systems have become. Kenya is also among the largest recipients of official development assistance on the African continent, receiving about $3.3 billion in aid in 2022, ranking it among the top 10 aid receivers alongside countries like Tanzania and Uganda. While this aid has enabled crucial development projects and supported public services, the uneven mix of sources and shifting global priorities pose risks. Recent aid cuts and realignments in global funding architecture, particularly around health and multilateral climate finance, are already affecting programs from HIV treatment to water and sanitation initiatives. Critics argue that heavy external dependence can undermine domestic accountability and long-term planning. When budgets hinge on donor cycles and priorities, governments may adjust policies to suit external agendas, sometimes at the expense of national strategic priorities. At the same time, unpredictable aid flows make long-term planning difficult for counties and ministries alike, complicating efforts to build durable systems for education, health, climate, adaptation, and agricultural development. With external resources shrinking and global cooperation under strain, the pressure is on Kenya to rethink how it funds its future, moving from short-term assistance to sustainable, self-reliant systems of development.
Well, that's all we have for you today on the Tosh program. Big thank you for staying with us, and a big shout out to all that made this program a success. I have been your host, Jesse Gitonga, and until next time, have a good one.